2020. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. I know most of you probably been here all day, so you've probably been hearing that a lot.
Still a new year.
Being as though it's my first meeting of the day, I'll go ahead and wish Happy New Year. That is a
Don't
fact.
tell them it's your first meeting. That's not a good thing to say.
It is. All right, good to see everyone. I'm informed of no citizens wishing to address the committee, so we will move straight into our CEO update. Mr. Early.
I think that things we're going to talk a little bit about bond and those kind of activities, but from Lou Mattingly's standpoint and from Angie Morgan's standpoint, I think things have gone exceptionally well from the bond. And the pre-conference, we had a good many people who are interested. We had, 165 participants in that. We've had 2 sets of responses back to questions. And I think that process is going very well. I gave an update to the Commissioner's Court on Tuesday, and well received, and I think people are pleased with the movement and the process. And so that's going quite well. So that's really the only thing I have, Mr. Chairman, to update on, and that is that it's going in its proper timeline. I believe that those responses are due back January 23rd. And so we will move forward with that.
Great, very good. Any questions for Mr. Early?
First of all, we had over
165 wanted to know about it and wanted to figure out what it is and what's in there and all that. So if you're thinking nobody's interested, there's a lot of interest. And I think it speaks not only to the interest of wanting to participate, but I do think that speaks to JPS. I think it's interesting that there are people in the community that want to make sure that they're going to help improve JPS. And I'm really pleased with that.
so once the dates here, it's all in.
Ralph, let me stop you. This item's on the agenda.
Yeah.
We're going to spend more time on it.
Yep.
Let me get past the CEO report in the minutes, and we'll follow that up and get all the questions answered, because I
bet.
know there's a lot of them. Let's move to item 4A, approval of the minutes of the November 7th, 2019 meeting. Any questions on the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Moved by Reverend Emerson, second by DT. In favor, all opposed, say, all two. It's a new year, isn't it? Any questions on the topic of the vote? All in favor say aye. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Now, for RFP, I visited with Angie, and Angie might as well come on up, and Lou, both of you, because a lot of the questions I know this is going to hopefully get as close as we can to bringing the planning committee up to speed, not only with what Robert has said, but with what we hope to transpire moving forward. And hopefully, we're not going to have all the answers to that, I know, but maybe at least we can have a few of them. So let me start with this. In terms of Robert on the RFP, and Angie, Lou, I know you guys are as familiar probably with Robert. The RFP as it sits today, there was 1 or 2 addendums sent out from the RFP, is that right?
Two addendums.
And both those addendums, what was the purpose of those addendums? Do we know?
Yeah. I'll let
Lou, go ahead.
Sure. Those addendums were just to respond to respondents' questions that they had over the RFP, some clarifications. We didn't receive any major questions to the RFP, which really attributes to the board and commissioners on how thorough you all were in kind of combing through that and making sure that all the content was very clear. It was evident that our respondents was very clear on what the expectations of them is going to be for you all.
And so all of those are still due back on January 23rd, right?
On January 23rd, and then there will be an evaluation for a short list committee. I don't have that schedule right in front of me. It's actually posted within the RFP itself, those dates that are tentative, but they'll come through. There's a third-party group of diverse professional experience that's going to get those respondents down to a short list and bring them before you in Commissioner's Court for approval. Okay, so let's back into that a little bit more. So normally, what would happen in the case of an RFP for a capital project is there would be a staff review committee that would basically go through the entire process,
filter the results, and come up with X number of alternatives.
Correct.
That would then come to typically the planning committee and probably finance committee for review. That's been the typical way that we've done it. Up to that point, are we gonna be doing it differently with this, or is that going to still be the same?
That's gonna still be the same. It's, nothing's gonna change. It's just, you know, ultimately, Commissioners Court, is also gonna get involved with the interviews. Whereas staff had kind of done this shortlisting before, we really needed, the committee that was putting together the RFP. You know, we've never done a program this big, so we've got a group of diverse, professional experience that's done these programs before, and they're gonna review those submittals. We've got, members from, participation from Tarrant County, and it's just really a diverse group of folks to kind of get that initial short list done to bring those folks before you all
So that,
to interview.
the difference would be, whereas normally it would be a JPS staff committee, capital committee would review that, we've got other professionals that are gonna be working, we're gonna call those staff appointees though, basically at this point.
Yes.
That are all staff level people, some from the county, some from outside, our own staff, and that's gonna form the committee that will basically review all the RFPs and come up with the initial filtering list and list of recommendations, right?
Correct. They would just develop a short list of 2 to 3, you know, folks to bring before you all for interviews and really to get down into the details for the
Okay.
program.
So, Robert, do you know, and you may not, Charlie, you may, once that short list has been produced and that comes to a committee, is that process going to involve planning and finance, or a combination of planning and finance? Or is it going to be a third sort of hybrid that might involve folks from the county as well?
My thought would be is, and again, part of this is trying to come up with the best system that creates a level of fairness and creates a level of insightfulness by that. The selection committee is going to use professionals that have been doing this for a good number of years, and they're professionals outside of Tarrant County as well. And they're individuals who have done these projects, and in 2 of the cases, they're retired individuals who I think bring a great deal of expertise to it. We will have that selection committee, and the only thing that I would amend slightly, and I'm never interested in amending Lou, is we would probably have it, have that group, that selection group, look at probably 7 or so and get that down to about 7, and then have that finance committee and planning committee in conjunction, then probably send a list to the Commissioners Court, whether that's a reduced list of 2 or 3, let the Commissioners Court then make the final decision as to who that is. But our hope would be you as a board would look at that 3 or 4 and say, we would be happy with any of the 4 of these. And then the Commissioners Court would make that final decision.
Would the recommendation go to the full board after joint planning and finance, or not?
It's certainly the discretion of you as chair, and Dr. Weber and Steve as well, from the planning, the finance, and the board chair. We, staff-wise, are fine with any of those approaches that y'all want to take. And staff's recommendation is to get the greatest degree of dialogue on this. The other thing is, and this may not be the appropriate time to say it, but I'm happy to say it. You can cut my mic off if you want to.
I don't know how.
I don't knock it out of the way.
If I knew that, I'd have done it.
Very good. Part of that selection committee that we as staff are going to recommend is that you have two board members to serve on that selection committee. And our thought process is that it would be you as
Now you can cut off his mic.
yeah, it would be you as past chair and chairman of the planning committee, and Pastor Emerson as past chair from his involvement as well, to help us with that selection committee. Y'all can obviously say, we have no interest in doing that, or don't make eye contact with me. But I think both of y'all bring some expertise to those that are on the outside, and that combination really works well. and then bring it here.
So Chuck, let me ask you, and everybody, but for that matter, does the board have a preference as to whether or not, once this goes to a joint planning and finance? Because my thought is, we don't need to have 3 or 4 separate meetings at the board level. I mean, to me, as efficient as we can possibly make it, let's make it. My thought is, we have a joint planning and finance committee meeting, which the whole board probably attends.
Yeah.
And we post that as a board meeting, and then not have to put that on a separate
I agree.
board agenda item. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so we can get that process at least clear as them, excuse me.
Go ahead, Reverend. I always defer to the mighty here.
Yeah, no. One of our questions first question is that evaluation committee, okay? How do we go about selecting that? That's crucial.
The staff level, the
Yeah,
staff
the
level
staff level.
evaluation committee.
How do you determine who, you don't have to respond now, but how do we determine who serves in that committee?
What we tried to do is, we tried to seek people, most of the people on there are not people we know individually. We asked our consultant, Mr. Morose, if he could seek people throughout the state that had a past history of dealing with this, who could help us with the selection process, who had no conflicts of interest, who didn't have an applicant in the process, or they were currently not working at this time. So those individuals are going to be people who are retired from the profession, or are people locally with the county and others that have an expertise of going through this process.
Robert, I can just inject one thing, Ralph, because I'm a little confused on, we've used the word evaluation committee. I got the RFP. I didn't see a defined, maybe there's a defined who that is in the RFP. Shouldn't be, because that doesn't do it, it's
No.
internal. So I haven't seen a document that says who, I think that's where Ralph may be going, I'm not putting words in that, but what is the evaluation committee, and how did those individuals become the evaluation committee? The second thing is, we interchange the word, Robert, you used the word selection group. Is a selection group and the selection committee, do they see it after the evaluation committee? They're the ones within the organization? Are those one and the same?
I think they're one of the
They're
same.
one of the.
Evaluation committee and selection committee
But
is
when
kind
they
of
get
being used
through
interchangeably.
narrowing down, let's just, I'm the numbers, let's say hypothetically, 14 deals come in,
Right.
RFPs.
Right.
I keep hearing we're gonna narrow it down to 3 or 4.
6. for you,
Six.
Robert, yeah.
14 comes in, 8 didn't even make the cut. This selection committee would, or this evaluation committee, selection committee, whatever the semantics are, somebody's already knocked off 8 people before this board would ever see them. Is that, am I trying, okay, so then this board would get, or the finance committee, along with the people we have serving, let's assume it's Ralph and Trent, then that group, along with some other people, would take that 6 and take it down to 3 to the board? Is that?
I think it kind of depends, because from past experience in this, I'll use the term evaluation committee as sort of a,
Right. The
everybody.
all-encompassing committee,
Right.
correct?
The evaluation committee's job has been to determine whether or not the respondents have complied with the RFP.
Correct.
And they will be empirically scored on how well they have complied with the RFP. And most of the time, when, again, in the past, when we see 2 or 3 that come in very close, and in terms of the scoring mechanism, all 3 will appear, and there will be a decision. In some cases, there may be a big gap between number 4 and number 5. And clearly, there's 4 that have risen to the top in terms of their ability to comply with the RFP. So I think we got to leave that kind of open.
It's kind of fluid.
Yeah, I don't want y'all, I don't
think
want
it's
y'all to think
fluid.
that anybody's going to say, that selection committee is going to come up with 6.
Right,
And that's going to come up to, I think they're going to look at that, and part of that is not to inundate for those looking through everything, for people that either didn't qualify or didn't put a portion of that in, or can't meet the basic specifications. Nobody's trying to cut anybody out
Right.
of this process. But you're getting quickly or quicker to the lick log on this issue, and at some point, everybody's going to get a little bit unadjusted by this. I understand. But this process, we want to be as open and as fair and use as many folks that are not connected and don't have a conflict of interest to merely look through that. This group, this body can say, we love all 7, we love all 8, we love all 9, we love whatever the case may be, but don't think y'all want to look at and assume we get 20 or 30 that respond.
Right.
You want to at least get it to a manageable level, because we don't have JPS-issued cots.
Right.
So we want to make sure that you're not living here. And so if we do that process and get it manageable is where we really want to be.
Thank you, Ralph. Selection, evaluations, one committee.
Same thing.
Types thing, situation.
Okay, Charlotte and I talked about this a little earlier. One of the concerns is the consultant, when he selects that committee or recommends that committee to evaluate those proposals that have come in, I think that we need to say to him, when he looks at those individuals, that he selects individuals, that those individuals are looking for some specific things. In the example, I'll give you example, how long have they been a company resident of the county, example, or if they're doing in partnership, how long has that partnership been in existence with you? Did you just become a partnership today to get this? Okay. So my hope is that when we talk to the consultant, that the individuals that he's looking to recommend to evaluate, that he's looking at individuals who's had all of that past experience.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I heard the recommendation earlier, you're going to be on that selection evaluation committee.
That's what I said. Our goal is to include 2 board members. Our interest is to have you and Mr. Petty serve on that committee. And since you're still looking at me right now, I'm taking that as a positive. Because I've seen your face when you do not approve of what I say. And so that is the approach that we would be taking.
Okay. So once that committee has narrowed it down, say, to the 6, whatever, that then comes to the board, to the joint planning and, okay, because I want to recommend that when it gets to us here, that we don't send the commissioners, here's our top 3. I think we need to send them, here's the top 3, but here's our choice.
That's y'all's
I just want to say it to
prerogative.
the board. Right, here's the top 3,
Prioritize them this way.
well, here's who this board recommends. I think, the reason I said that, I think we need to make a statement to the commissioners.
Sure, no question.
You're making one right now. And that's,
I'm at TV right now.
look into the camera.
Well, and that's precedent. That's precedent. Precedent has always been that the board is the one that in the past has made that selection. So I don't think the precedent changes at all. The only thing that's different is it's just going to go to a different level before it's finalized.
When will this happen? When will you be bringing it back?
That's a good question, because January 23rd is the date that they're all due back.
Right.
And so then, how long does the committee need to review them? Do you have a thought
Luke, go
process
ahead.
there?
So whoever's on the, let's call it a short list review committee, before the evaluation committee. So the short list is gonna, to narrow that down once the responses come. And I think that would take about a 2-week process. These are gonna be some pretty lengthy responses, and they'll take some time to go through. And the criteria that'll be used is that was issued in the RFP. So everyone's looking at the same thing.
I'm still confused on the timeline.
So 2 weeks after they are received,
They're going to be received on the
They'll be reviewed.
29th, on the 23rd.
23rd,
2 weeks, they're going to do what?
that's the time period that the committee is
Take the
going to review
14 to
them.
6, or the number of
Right.
responses
Narrow it-
down.
Within 2 weeks, gonna narrow it down and then bring it to the joint.
Yes, sir.
Is that what you're saying, Luke? So after 2 weeks, it would be ready to go on the next joint agenda of.
Right, and of course, it's gonna depend on the number of responses, and the length of time that that short list committee, takes to do their scores and their evaluations, but that's a tentative schedule.
That answer your question, Chuck?
Yes.
Okay. Dorothy, you had a question? or
No, Zim was before him.
I'm sorry.
I'm with the Reverend.
Okay.
We are the governing body.
Yes.
We ought to make one submittal. I'd further state that the evaluation committee ought to pick one, and then they can show the rankings of any others that we can then discuss. But they're gonna be the ones that are gonna go into depth of what's happening. And so they ought to come up with a recommendation as to who they think is the best candidate. If we do anything other than that, this board's gonna get bound up in all sorts of discussion and cussing about what to go do. And so, in any place that I've ever been, the evaluation committee comes up with one board. Now, they'll give you, if they've gotten it down to 6, they'll give you the information on all 6, how they ranked in the various categories and whatnot. But they still are gonna have to pick one that we can either vote on or look at the other things and say, well, we want some more information on this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, this is not without precedent. Whenever we went through reviews for the initial master plan almost a decade ago,
Yep.
we did exactly this same thing. We went through the process reviewing the consultants. That was the Blue Cottage process. I mean, the board is very accustomed to going through this and coming up with one recommendation. So again, I think the precedent is clear, and I don't think we need to break with that. We just need to make sure we adhere to it closely.
I know I was 5 minutes late, but who's on this evaluation committee?
Do we have a list of names? Because I don't. I mean, it is a list, Dorothy, of appointed individuals that are not just staff, but also the consultant that we had hired to help us put together the RFP, Bob Morose, has also assisted in bringing individuals that have got experience, not necessarily Fort Worth people,
Right.
but experience in looking at this level of a project and being able to evaluate it. So it's an appointed committee.
And the reason you don't have a list of names is because not everybody on that list has been contacted for even y'all's review.
I'm okay with your explanation. My second question is what staff will be on that committee? Because I don't want everything to this contract, to this consultant, so what staff is serving on that committee?
Those two right there, probably.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have the staff of JPS, you're gonna have Lou, and you're gonna have Angie will play a critical role in this, and your routine staff for construction projects will be the staff that does. It won't be directed by outside anybody, but we did need, Lou and I and Angie, we did not know people in that industry that says, can you at least look at these to make sure that they qualify?
Let me interrupt you just a second.
You go right ahead.
Can I ask that you not name who it is?
Sure.
But if anything, we do it closed door. If we can't do it closed door, I recommend we not publicly name who it is.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean,
Okay.
it's a staff-appointed committee, so that's.
Right.
Yes, sir. That won't be a problem.
Okay.
That was actually one of our questions that we did get with
Yes.
the RFP, and that was our response, was that we wouldn't want those names to get out
Right.
there for obvious reasons.
No question.
Yeah.
What's the cost of all this?
Yeah.
$1 billion.
I'm just curious, how much
The-
money are we spending to get to
Oh,
the
it's gonna
point
be
of-
a lot.
Spending money.
Well, you may, but. I don't know that. The question was, is the cost, and, I mean, the cost right now is the cost that we've paid a consultant thus far. I don't have the number right in front of me of what we paid Mr. Morose. But in addition to the consulting cost, there hasn't really been much cost at this point.
Cost
Board
of the
members all get raises
advertisement.
for participating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We get raises.
Yeah, just routine cost for the
Yeah,
advertising.
there hadn't been anything out of the ordinary. We'll be happy to give you a rundown of everything, but, the only cost at this point is what we have paid a consultant to help us come up with the language and help us come up with the process.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Morose?
Morose.
Is the consultant. He helped us write the RFP. Did he help us notify and distribute the RFP to potential respondents?
No.
And he's helping us come up with this evaluation committee.
The last question, yes, the next question, no. He did not help with
He
distributing.
did not.
No, we,
Nor did he provide any names.
Yeah. It was
Those,
all changed.
and I too was late, so my apologies. Those RFP responses are already being received.
Yeah, January 23rd, they're all due.
They're due on the 23rd.
And where do they go?
Here.
the office of the CEO, so right down the hall.
Timestamped and ensured they're sealed.
Correct.
And et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have them sign in.
There's been two
whoever
addendums,
carries it
Roger, that's
in,
been
and-
sent out, and that's all. They're minor addendums, that's all that's been requested.
Yeah. It's pretty much.
But the advertisement and posting that we did is just, what standard Texas government code, requires us to do, and
Well, I
we'll
wanted to
still
make
go
sure
through that
if we have a
process.
consultant helping us write the RFP, the consultant wasn't also charged with going out and handing out the RFP.
Oh, no.
No,
That's all I was getting at.
that part, no.
Okay, so is that clear as mud for everybody?
Can I just get a little summary then? They're, everything should be in by January 23rd.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then it'll take about 2 weeks for a group that's gonna be put together by whoever's putting it together, with you two on it. Correct?
Well, even though we don't want to name names, they haven't agreed to anything.
And they haven't agreed to 2 weeks either.
And they haven't
They
agreed
said
to,
that's a target.
and the 2 weeks is a swag. I mean, we don't know the complexity of
I understand
those.
that, But we're in it to a year already, so.
Right. But you,
Okay,
at this,
well, let's just say.
Two-ish, 2 weeks-ish.
Spot me in a, yes.
Okay.
Then we'll have a special called joint meeting
Right.
to go over the recommendation, in theory, of the selected group with the other groups rated below so we can see,
Everybody ranked.
Yes, sir.
and then we will make a decision on that group or somebody else to send to the county commission.
Yes, sir.
yes, sir.
The only thing that I would maybe object, it doesn't necessarily have to be a special call meeting.
Yeah.
Depending on when it happens, it could fall in with the normal
Planning, just make it a
planning,
joint
finance
planning.
committee meeting process.
Gotcha.
If we need to, we can, but I mean, we
Our
don't,
next board meeting is 3 weeks from the RFP due.
Yes.
pretty darn close.
I
Yeah,
gather
yeah, it's gonna
by that, the top 2 or top 3 won't be doing a presentation to the board?
I do believe, I mean, I think the plan was that if we wanted to interview, if the committee wanted to interview any of the applicants, we were free to do that.
Sure.
I think that's always
Total
been.
prerogative
and
of
We've
the-
done that in the past. We've
Well,
brought in
if all
a couple of
in the
groups.
past, you've always narrowed it down to 2 or 3.
Two or three,
And
they
then
came in.
those 2 have presented, to the full board, you listen. I mean, even though the committee makes a recommendation,
sure.
you still.
You vote, you had a chance to ask
And I
questions.
think that's still on the table. I mean,
Yeah, it's certainly a priority of the committee.
All right, other
I
questions?
just had one more
Yes.
question, and just a clarification. You stated shortlist committee, and we were talking about it. What does that mean, shortlist?
It's just the group that Dr. Weber was talking about that's going to take those first couple weeks to, it may or may not include Mr. Petty and Reverend Emerson.
We
The
weren't real big,
evaluation
yeah, we
committee.
weren't real big on the vernacular, so I apologize that we've had different words. We
Selection,
didn't,
evaluation, they all roll
I
out.
appreciate it, because I understand completely.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I don't know that that's good or bad, but you and I are on the same page. Yeah.
Out here, I already talked about simple numbers. I keep going back to clarification. 14 come in on the 23rd. There is a group, evaluation committee, somebody narrows that down. Is the group that Ralph or Trent, are they on that group?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So they're in it the whole, okay, that's all.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Answers, ask and answer, thank you.
Other than that, Mr. Chair, we haven't been doing anything.
Not much else to do.
And we will be
When we
better,
gonna see
we will be better about our names. I didn't think that was gonna be the catch-up here, but we'll be happy to name them.
Well, no, I
in a-
think
in
not
that way.
naming is a good thing,
I do
with the
too.
exception, obvious exception of the 2 that we've already named.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so,
You're in it too deep.
everybody good on that? Can we move on? No action on that item. The next item I had requested, and, the bond committee has taken up so much information and time and bandwidth that we still do have a regular capital process in our district. And one of the things I wanted, Angie, don't leave it.
Yeah.
I wanted-
Angie, why would you leave? What came across your mind to walk away from that table?
Intuition.
One thing I wanted to do is, and we will combine this into Angie's entire report, so that's why I called you back, Angie, I'm sorry. But the process, the projects that we had started that are not bond-related projects, and there are many, you give those to us in our normal capital update, and that's coming, I presume. But I'd also like to hear about any of the work that we have done that we had sort of begun, but then had not necessarily evolved into the bond committee effort. We, for example, had hired an architect, and we were going to be looking at the general components of the next clinic. So can we get kind of a comprehensive report on those activities and where those are going, and add those to your normal capital quarterly project report? Okay, thank you. It's all yours.
Ready to talk? Okay, so, Trent, Mr. Chairman, did you have anything in particular that you wanted to talk about?
You know, the architect was the first question I had. We had also done some work on the overall campus in terms of parking and how that might ultimately fit in with some of what ended up being bond projects. My question is, have those things stopped? Have we continued those, or how do they fit in?
I would say we're still working behind the scenes, certainly. And you're referring to an architect maybe for the ambulatory surgery center or patient care center?
Yes,
That was E4H.
That's right.
They were awarded with the shortlist process and everything we normally go through. They have looked at programming and what we could put in there. We haven't spent a lot of time or money on that.
Okay.
To this stage. We're really waiting for the board's discretion on that.
Okay.
We are looking at, other opportunities, the Health Center for Women, there's some opportunities down there to do some things. There's certainly always room, everybody in this room knows we need parking. And so there are some opportunities for parking garage, surface level parking. Is there anything particular you want to talk about? Because I could have been a lot more prepared.
Yeah, I do. I think, and thank you for that, by the way. I think it's really important that we not allow the bond committee and the bond committee process to take the place of everything JPS needs to be
Right.
doing relative to capital.
Okay,
And
good.
there is a lot of capital needs at JPS that are not in the bond committee. And I think one of the things, and you mentioned board directions, one of the reasons I want to talk about it today, and I want Robert to address this as well. We've had significant opportunities come up with regard to Women's Center. We've had additional comments come up about what clinic terms might be good to be looking at. Not long ago, we redid the first floor for the pharmacy and for the waiting area. These are everyday things. These are the stuff that we continue to do. And it gets a little confusing when we start talking about the bond committee, because people just sort of default to, well, all that's in the bond committee. Well, it's not all in the bond committee.
Right.
So one of the things I think we want to do is keep the rest of these projects on track and make sure that you as a staff don't have any question at all about what the board's intent is relative to following through on those projects.
Okay, thank you for that clarification,
Okay.
because now I can speak a lot more intelligently. So moving forward, we still have our behavioral health, environmental safety. We're down to really the last two biggest components of that, and that is the dining room and the courtyard that we talked about last time. The construction documents have been prepared. Now we're ready to put those on the street for bid. So once we get to that point, this has been a very long project to get through. At that point, we've talked to finance about this project ends and whatever else we need moving forward in relation to ligature risk,
Angie,
that will
talk
become a
just
new
Let me back
project.
you up for just a second. Talk
Yes,
a
sir.
little bit about that to some of the members who are newer to that process, about some of the things that we really need addressing over at behavioral health.
Yes.
And give everybody a bit of an idea. And to Trent's point, and I appreciate you suggesting that, because we as staff, you have such a large organization with 1.2 million patient visits a year, you've got to constantly keep going. You can't just sit down and put everything into a basket and say, this is all bond, and we find that in 2 or 3 years, we haven't made capital improvements, nor can you say, well, let's just not make any improvements because ultimately that's going to be a new building. You have to be smart and balance that. So what we're going to talk to you all about today are the things that came pre-bond, and whether you have a bond or don't have a bond, we as a staff are going to strongly recommend to y'all as a board, we have to keep moving on these because you'll fall way behind and we'll be in real trouble in the care that we provide our patients. So go into a little bit about some of the things we're doing in behavioral health, just to give
Okay.
everybody an update on the dining room and some of the other things.
Sir. So, Joint Commission, gives us our accreditation, and ligature risk is really big with them. So when they came almost 2 years ago, and remember, we had 0 ligature risk because they were accepting mitigation plans at the time. We had done a lot of work, but since that time, between Joint Commission and CMS, they changed their mind on a few things. So things that they were accepting mitigation plans on, they are no longer accepting. And where I come into that is with the physical environment. And so at this time, the courtyard and the dining room came up. Of course, Celia could speak about this forever, but for me, it's just making any room we can ligature resistant. And if you sit in a room and you never think about it, everything in that ceiling is a ligature point. And, the light fixtures, the light switch, everything. So just tamper-resistant screws, it's all your accessories, paper towel holders, toilet paper rollers, anything you can think of has to be replaced with a specialty accessory, and they're expensive and they're very long lead items because every hospital in the United States that has behavioral health is wanting the same thing. So we're getting through that process. That is one of the reasons it's taken so long, but we are down to those last 2 components. So for us, it's going to be a win when we ever get there. We have all these door alarms, they're pressure alarms, so if anybody tries to do anything over a door, it will alarm, the staff can hear. Those have been challenging because they're really sensitive and anything can make them go off. But we're working, and TSP, bless their heart, they work with us. But other than that, we're the old cancer center. We moved into our new cancer center. We're over there working right now. We have actually some of our skilled tradesmen are in there doing a refresh because we're going to, if y'all remember, this was all in the capital, so it's approved for FY20. We'll be moving 1617 Hemp Hill, which we call Metro West. That building needs to be demoed, but we'll be moving that behavioral health component out down to West Terrell, which is the old cancer center. It will become our behavioral health central assessment and PHP. And we have in the budget, and we have a plan to demo Metro West, and that will become some parking, and so that's really exciting. I've had lots of volunteers for people that want a sledgehammer or, something. So, yes, everybody, I think, is excited about that. But here in the main hospital, particularly in the women's areas, up on 2 South, we're going to do a refresh. That floor, that's not construction. We're not tearing out walls, but a refresh. Those finishes up there are old and dated, and, we need to refresh that. So that was budgeted. You approved that. We're going to do that this year. Our 16 L&D rooms, this is another Joint Commission CMS issue. Everything in there's wood because at the time that was built, back probably in the 90s, we put wood everywhere. Well, they don't accept wood anymore because it's porous and, you're going to get some germs in there. So we budgeted to replace all the millwork in there with, it'll be a laminate and solid surface. So that's really going to be one room at a time, which is laborious and a long process, but we can't shut that floor down. So we're just going to do it one room at a time. We've got MRI zoning, which you approved. We've got some zoning issues with our MRI that we're working with Kenny and his staff on for safety over there in that area. The lower level in medical records, and for the new board members, when we got the EMR and the electronic medical records in the next year or 2, we scanned all the paper records, and that opened up about 5,500 square feet of space that used to store paper records. Well, we're going to put some training rooms in there. We're hard-pressed for rooms that can be used for training. So those are going to be training rooms that'll require quite a bit of mechanical because, you're going to need a lot more air for bodies than you did for paper records. But those are all coming up on our list for this year. We've got a little project over at JPOC, which is our JPS professional office buildings 1350 and 1400. This happens to be in the 1350 building. The first floor, it had a I call it, and y'all forgive me, it's oncology infusion is what I called it, but they call it some medicine something. But we vacated that when we moved to the cancer center. So it's a little suite over there that we're gonna work on separating our workman's comp and employee health from occupational health, because they've just become so overcrowded and we've outgrown that suite. And this is just directly across the hall, and it's just a perfect fit for that, and it'll require very little construction. So there's not much money in the budget for that, but we intend to do that this year. So those are some of the non-bond projects we have coming up in FY '20 that we're working on.
Let me,
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead,
Yes,
Pastor,
sir.
sorry.
It would help
I'm
for
sorry.
me, if nobody else.
Yes, sir.
It would help, that presentation you just gave was great,
Okay.
but a slideshow,
Oh, sure.
so that the board sees those places and what took place. So, you talk about, but I'm trying to visualize where is this, where is
Pictures
this?
tells 1,000 words.
Yeah, so it would,
How about at the next planning committee, we'll go ahead and put a slideshow together that has the floor plan, so we can show you physically where that is on the campus, and then some pictures to show you current state, and if we have it by then, what the future state should look like. Would that work?
yeah.
One of staff's asks today is the next issue we're going to discuss. It is part of that capital, or could be, and that's planning for the Women's Center and what we see. And let me take y'all back a little bit, because I know y'all have had a few meetings, not only today, but overall. It was about a year ago, wasn't it, that we did a space audit and looked at the inefficiency of the space that we had at our Women's Center. Our Women's Center is, for those of you that are trying to put things in perspective, just down from the foundation office. It's between the foundation office and where public health is. Our Women's Center is an expansive building. We had not particularly used that space very effectively. And for those of you who've been in it or have had family members, you jump out at you fairly significantly that we could probably do better. So at the same time we got that space audit back that talked about the inefficiencies of what we had, we began to look at efficiencies of it. That then got us motivated to look at what is above us on the 4th floor, which is our clinic up there. Because when you open up space, you take space that's inefficient and see if you can backfill it. And so that's what we began to look at and say, this 4th floor clinic that's up here is a challenge. One, it's challenging from a parking standpoint. Secondly, unless you know where you're going, you wouldn't even know it's there. It is difficult. And so what we began to think is it wise to begin to move part of that 4th floor or all of that 4th floor and look at the Women's Center as that housing unit for it? But we couldn't go any further until we asked y'all for planning money and planning capability. There isn't any, we're not tearing walls down, we're not doing anything at this point, but we as staff feel now we've gotten to a point where we've penciled enough on paper. We want to really get a planning team in that says, how can you be efficient with what you're doing? The other thing is, if you look at this area, we sometimes forget about clinic space and clinic need and accessibility, because mentally you got in mind, here's a hospital. You've got to think about the number of people in the medical district area that need clinic care and clinic space and get easy access to it. We get foot traffic. We get a lot of folks that need as much help and as much accessibility. So, Angie, you may want to expand a bit more on that and what I left out or not, but what we want to ask y'all today for is planning money to begin to look at that. And again, I didn't want that to get confused with the bond aspects and saying, well, is this or that? It's where we need to go to continue to move, because every day we're dealing with some inefficiencies that's really having an effect on our patients.
Conceptually, does Women's Center move, or does it simply become a new clinic with Women's Center in it? Or do we know?
No, we've got some ideas, and Karen, you may want to come up and suggest some of that, because we all enjoy, you may come up as well, we've all talked about that and how to be smart about what we're doing.
bright and young operations leader. She has really made me look good, and it's probably why I'm in the position I'm now in, is because of Joy. But I want to introduce her to you because she will be overseeing community health, and it gives me great pride and joy to introduce her. I always tell Robert that when I came and I looked at the 3 rules, one of the things that it says is to seek joy, and so in fact I did do that literally. I didn't know that it was greater than that, okay? But I did want to introduce you. I have all the confidence in the world that Joy will continue to do the great things that she's done in community health. So I wanted all of you to have that comfort level and to welcome her in her new position. She has moved, in January we moved her to Vice President over community health. So again, this is a leader who has really proven herself and has been rewarded for the work that she has done. So wanted to
Congratulations,
start
Joy.
with that.
Welcome.
Thank you. Great. Well, we'd love to talk a little bit, just high level of, first I have to say thank you to Dr. Duncan. I mean, that was a really nice intro to come into, but it really is about a team effort. And I think as we look at our Health Center for Women that's on the main street, we came off of an internal audit that showed we had a 17% utilization of that space. And we said, wow, we really have an opportunity here to maximize that space. Also, while looking at the data that supports what the patient needs are, not just the patients that we have in front of us today, but where we're going in the future. And so that space itself is very attractive in its location, its first floor entry, its adequate parking, the proximity of the public health department. So it really did help us to sit down and say, let's take a pause and assess our current operations and see where those opportunities are to bring clinic space into that building to maximize it, to make it better for not only our patients and our community, our family medicine residency program, which is one of the top in the nation. So that student experience, we talk about how do we retain these residents so that they stay. And that 4th floor, which we could bring you some pictures, we'd love to bring back some pictures. There's a lot to be said for some improved space, not only for the patient experience, but for the teaching program that we have that is recognized nationally. In addition to looking at FHC, our Family Health Clinic program, and that residency to maybe relocate down to the Health Center for Women's space, we have some other thoughts and ideas that we'd love to maybe bring back in some further detail for your review and thoughts, is around looking at our geriatric program in our JPOC building. We know that in Tarrant County and just nationally, the trends are going to be that we will continue to see an aging population, and we would love to have them on a 1st floor level entry and not a 3rd floor elevator ride, and to put them really close to a lab. And so when we think about the patient, and this is something that Dr. Duncan and I, as far as when we look at community health and our heart of it, is we really say we've got to put that patient and the family, those social drivers that definitely, when you think about just transportation, we even looked at like there's a very convenient bus stop location. So when you have someone get off right there at that Health Center for Women, it's much more easier to navigate than to tell them how to walk through the hospital, to go upstairs, to take an elevator. And then, by the way, when you need your medicine, go back downstairs, go to the pharmacy. And when you need lab, go across the street. So it really is, how do we just make that more convenient for our patient, our community, and then also give that expansion that we need for growth in those departments and those clinics that we know there's going to be growth and need. So I can answer more questions of what we as a team collectively have thought of for that area, or we can bring that back another time. Chair Petty, I will leave it to you.
You asked about the Health Center for as far as women's health in
Yeah.
that building. It would remain in that
Okay.
building.
Okay.
And to
Yes.
Joy's point, we looked at kind of those wraparound services such as pediatrics, hospital follow-up, things that would support the services that we currently provide over in the Women's Health Center.
Great.
So
Yep.
we were able to look at the actual use of the women's health program over there and to move it into a space and
consolidate
then
it.
allow growth around that, so.
So the question conceptually to the planning committee, because we're not finance committee, we're not here to talk about money and allocation that needs to go to the proper committee, but what I'm hearing staff ask the planning committee is, do they have the ability to move forward to prepare a more formal request that could be then brought back to finance that would incorporate some of these concepts and ideas that you've heard today. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I just want, yeah, I agree. I just would want to add, because Dr. Duncan and Jordan, what an excellent presentation, just verbally, just on the spot. You know, it's really clear. With Roger, I understood it. Okay,
Good.
but just for the powers to be outside of this room, it would help to document that. Here's why we need to do this. So that we have that document that looks at that. So if anybody raises any questions, especially the question Trent asked about how does that affect our bond process? And that we're not supplanting the bond process with this.
Right.
Sure.
You know, so I just want to throw that out.
Good, good.
Helpful.
Well, I think you got your answer. Good presentation, good ideas, and I think we want to continue to encourage all of you. You know, JPS is still moving forward. Bonds or no bonds, we got a lot of work to do, and we appreciate the work. Joy, congratulations, welcome. Karen, congratulations and welcome. Happy to have you in this role. We look forward to hearing a lot more from you, from each of you, because our wheels are still moving. We're not going to sit around waiting on things that have to be done.
Quick request.
Sure.
Angie presented about 10 projects that are ongoing. Could we see a projected date of completion?
Sure, we can bring that back. We can put a schedule together for you, Dr. Weber, and bring that back when we bring the
bet.
presentation.
I think, Angie, just modify the report
Yes, sir?
and give us a section that is prospective projects, estimated timeframes. You know,
We'll do
keep
it.
doing what you're doing on these, because these are empirical. These
Yes,
are
sir.
cost to date. But some of these are really more forward-looking, and just incorporate it into one report and categorize it accordingly.
We'll do it.
Great.
That's great, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions of staff on this, Dorothy?
I had a question about, I thought we were doing a traffic study. Did that ever happen?
There was a study involving some access and wayfinding on traffic related to the parking, but it was all, I think it was predicated on the Med-Surg Center, wasn't it? On what we were going to be doing with that? So
Yes.
is that still ongoing, or is that on hold?
How would you complete that one? Yeah.
The traffic study that was done for the patient care center, that has been completed, and that information will just roll into the bond program. whenever
Okay.
Oh,
that
that's the
gets
bond,
underway.
that's on.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
Okay, all right, good. That is one that did get incorporated.
Okay.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you all, that was good.
Thanks.
That's
Great,
appreciated.
great report.
And thank you all from the planning committee, because like I said, we had gotten to the point where our noodling on paper has now gotten to a point where it needs to be more sophisticated. So giving us a green light to move forward with planning is helpful. And I think if you're comfortable, we see that as a sign from y'all that we can continue on with the planning in this and bring you back more details.
Yeah, I think everybody's in favor of.
Good.
Steve said, thanks for spending all his money.
Thank you. Well, now that y'all like the idea, we'll take it to finance and see what they say.
Awesome. Okay, thank you all. Went a little longer than normal, but appreciate you being here. We do not have anything for executive session, so if there's nothing else, we'll declare ourselves adjourned at 4:25. The special legal committee will meet after this back in the executive conference room, okay?